Good evening. Welcome to the Township of Falls Planning Commission meeting, August 27th, 2024. Please stand and salute the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Binney, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Everett?
Present.
Mr. O'Brien?
Present.
Mr. Henderson?
Present.
I'm present. And Mr. Haney?
Present. All right. Item number one.
Turn my microphone on.
Item number one, Britton Industries, 4 MY Lane, Morrisville, PA, 19067, TMP number 13-028-075-001, preliminary and final land development.
Good evening, Commission. Bryce McGuigan from Begley Carolyn here on behalf of the applicant, Britton Realty. Thank you so much for having us here this evening. I have with me tonight a few people I'd just like to introduce off the bat. We've got John Richardson of Dumac Engineering, the engineer for the project, who's had the opportunity to design the plans the Commission has for them tonight. I also have here Dan Carr representing Britton Industries. So if the Commission has any questions regarding the actual project or the actual business rather, Dan will be happy to address those later on during the presentation. We're here tonight to request recommended preliminary and final land development approval for our project, which involves the removal of the junkyard use on site and essentially the laying of millings on the property for storage of mulch and trailers related to our mulch business. Specifically speaking, the mulch is not going to be, piles of mulch. We're talking about palletized bagged mulch. We received zoning approval many years ago now for both the use of the property as well as for an impervious surface going up to 100%. Since that time, tough to believe, but we have been going through the land development process for the years since then. So we are here tonight, like I said, requesting preliminary and final recommended approval. So, like I said, apart from maintaining the existing drive, we're going to be laying millings that will be used for the bulk storage area. No structures are presently proposed. It will all just be essentially a storage operation. So at this point, since our zoning approval way back at the end of 2020, we've obviously received review letters from Doug's office here, from traffic engineer, as well as Bucks County Planning Commission. Before I get into those letters, which essentially, more or less, spoiler alert, they're all essentially will complies, with the exception of 2 extra items from Doug and Joe's letter related to sidewalks and lighting. Apart from that, just the existing waivers that we've requested along with those 2 items, which I will be happy to go through in detail. But I think what might help the Commission first is to have John come up here, go through the plans a little bit so that we can orient everyone to the layout of the site and some of the conditions that we're working with. John?
Good evening, John Richardson from Dumac Engineering. In front of you is a site on My Lane. It's located at the intersection of Route 1 and My Lane. There's currently a driveway that is here and here. Both of those driveways will be maintained in the proposed condition. The site, as Bryce has said, will be surfaced with millings. Part of the reasons that we're using millings is this site is a Act 2 site, so it is contaminated. We've worked through those approvals with DEP, and the option is either to cap the site to keep rainwater from percolating into the soils, or add 2 feet of fill above the existing ground. That way it isolates those contaminants. The site is currently a mix of uses. Britton does have some uses on the site. Britton is primarily in this area here, and this area is a junkyard, which historically occupied the entire site. This was the site before Britton got involved at all, and as you can see, the entire site was utilized as a junkyard, including areas to the north, which that area has been determined by the PADEP to be wetlands. The area that is hatched with the little, at this scale, the little black dots is determined to be wetlands by the PADEP. Interesting enough, the Army Corps said they are outside of their jurisdiction because it's isolated wetlands. So the Army Corps said we're clear with them, but PADEP has made determination that we're under their jurisdiction for the wetlands. As part of the development, we would be not disturbing the wetlands. We're leaving those remain as is. The gray area on here is the perimeter of millings. We would be providing asphalt along the driveway coming in. The stormwater on the site, as I previously stated, it's currently being used as a junkyard, or historically was used as a junkyard. There's already a significant amount of impervious surface on the site, but we are adding additional impervious surface. In order to manage that, and a good amount of the existing site, we're providing a underground stormwater management basin, which is essentially pipes and stone, underground and isolated from the groundwater. It would occupy this area on the site that's denoted by the hatching. Even though we're not allowed to infiltrate groundwater because of the contaminations on the site, this dry well, the underground basin, has been designed in accordance with current PADEP regulations that essentially allow you to take credit for infiltrating water even when you're not. It's a concept they call managed release concept. So even though we're not allowed to infiltrate the water into the ground as we normally would try to promote, we essentially are able to take credit for how we design the system, even though we're not infiltrating it. As in the current proposal, we would be providing plantings along my lane for some additional street trees. I know Jones's letter had said, or Doug's letter had said that additional buffering perhaps should be provided. We would not be opposed to providing a row or groupings of trees along the sliver, also will say, between the development site and the existing wetlands. We don't want to get into the wetlands trying to plant trees or anything within the wetlands. The site is primarily drains towards Route 1. Even though this is wetlands, it also is I'll call it a very slow-moving swale, shallow and very slow-moving on a normal basis. It traverses the site and then crosses my lane through an existing storm pipe right there. Our dry well or underground basin would discharge to that, to essentially the opening to that pipe that crosses under my lane. As Bryce said, we've currently been to the zoning hearing board. We obtained variances for the use on the site, as well as the impervious surface. And I know there was some question about timing. We did go to the zoning hearing board back in 2020. And since then, we've been working through Environmental Regulations Act 2. We had to apply for and receive a jurisdictional determination from the Army Corps. We then went back to the PADEP with MPDS. That's when the wetlands were discovered. So then we had to modify the plan and negotiate with PADEP in terms of what they wanted to protect on the site. So while it has been 4 years since we received the zoning variances, the plan and the site has been actively in pursuit of permits.
Thanks a lot, John. Really appreciate that level of detail you're able to provide. Like I said, with respect to the letters, there's no issue with the Remington and Vernick letter. With respect to Doug's, like I said, every issue in that will apply with the exception of 2. That I'd like to point out because it's an addition to the 9 waivers that we formally requested. The additions are from section, I believe, 209-40, which is to not have lighting in our parking area, as well as section 191-39G to not require sidewalks. Obviously, if the township insists, we'll be more than happy to pay a fee in lieu for those sidewalks. But otherwise, we're requesting the other 9 waivers that we delineated. We'll be more than happy to go through each waiver individually, or if the commission has specific questions regarding certain waivers or any other questions regarding the project, obviously, John, Dan, and myself are more than happy to address those. So at this point, I guess I'll open up to any questions the commission might have.
Any question from the board?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. What keeps the millings from going into the basin?
John?
When millings are put down, they're, I wouldn't say compacted, but they're compacted. And once that's done, it's a fairly stable surface. It's a surface actually recommended for the Act 2 that we have to prevent infiltration of groundwater. It's recognized by the Conservation District and PADEP. It's relatively stable after it's placed and compacted.
So the basin profile of the outlet structure, at least for BMP3, the outlet structure is a foot above the 100-year flood. So that means that the 100-year flood, or 1% flood, is going to make its way out to the parking area, the storage area, before it gets into the outlet structure. So what keeps that from happening?
I'm not sure I understand your question. We don't have a floodplain on the site.
Well, in your stormwater management, you show the elevation of the 100-year flood, 1 foot below the outlet structure. So the water will fill up until it gets to the outlet structure, and it will leach out into the storage area.
On the current screen is a detail or a cross-section of the underground system. At this scale, it's a little hard to see. But the top of the system is essentially where the 100-year water surface would be, and the ground surface does remain above that.
And maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but if I looking at sheet number 8 of 14, and I look at the cross-section detail of BMP number 3 and BMP number 2, the outlet structure is a foot above the 100-year elevation. Unless I have a completely different set of plans than you do.
You might, because we only detailed BMP 1 on the current set of plans. I think you might be looking at an old set of plans. So before the PADP got involved, we had 3 separate basins on the site. That has been consolidated into one.
I guess we don't have the right plans.
So while Mr. Biddy's looking through that, I do have one quick question. Just from the fact over the past few years that I've been in that area with different types of mulch fires, has there been any discussion with as we expand and with this layout, to put any type of dry piping system in for fire department access for any of the mulch fires, anything along those lines, or any type of water system?
There has not yet. We have not received a review from the fire marshal. However, I would believe that the client would be amenable to putting in water if the fire marshal required it. I know on some of Britton's other sites, he had some requirements for separation between the stockpiles and stuff like that.
Yeah, I just think that you, as a steward of the community, should recommend some of these items, because I've been on Route 1 squirting water from a busy highway onto this property and the property before it. So it's my recommendation that you look into some type of dry piping system where the fire system can be supported without putting first responders on Route 1 to try and put out this fire.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you.
Could you tell me the purpose of the multiple lease areas, if it's going to be occupied and used as storage for Britton Industries?
Once again, that's the old set of plans. The current set of plans does not have lease areas.
So you just took them off, but probably you're going to do that in the future anyway? Because
No.
you're doing that now, right? You're leasing it to somebody now?
Actually, it's an agreement of sale. Britton doesn't currently own it. They have an agreement to buy it.
Me personally, I think we're replacing one eyesore with another eyesore, personally, because this is the entrance to our township, and when we come into our township, we see a big pile of garbage, mulch, and trash that's being crushed up in the mulch. So I personally don't think this is an improvement.
Sure. Well, if I may, so a couple things. First of all, this was initially proposed with multiple lease areas. That is, I will say definitively, that is not the current proposal. That is not how we will use the property. And with respect to other mulch storage in the area, This will be a little different in that what we're doing is palletized bagged mulch, so you're not going to see a large mulch pile here. It's going to be stacked piles. Now, we understand, obviously, we understand potential fire hazard. We will obviously be happy to look into that and have discussions with the fire marshal regarding potential efforts to ensure there's no hazard with that. But with respect to actual, what you're going to see driving by, it's going to look a million times better than the junkyard that's generally been there for a long time. And that's one of the things that came out when we discussed this back in 2020 at the zoning hearing board. And I think it was, the memory of the junkyard was a little fresher back then because the junkyard was, if you even just look back at historical aerials, it was a thriving junkyard back then. And since that time, Britton's taken over more of the property and we've been using more of the property, so we've been cleaning that up. And again, it's not going to be a pretty meadow, but it is going to be a well-run establishment. It's going to be an orderly business and much better than it's historically been. So we would say this is an improvement, and what we're trying to do is, with respect to these waiver requests and with the pending application, is to ensure it's done the right way. So, we do have some waiver requests, but they're designed in conjunction with what we're trying to do with the site.
So your plan is not to lease it currently? That doesn't mean it won't change in the future, correct?
I don't know let me put it this way. My client has plans for the future, and some of those were on the plan in terms of certain designs that he's would like to follow through with. In conversations with the township, I believe, I don't want to misstate this, John. I know you've had some more conversations about this than I have, but I don't think the township wants that on the plan, so we're going to remove some of those references to the future use of the property, but John can explain that.
I would also say that, no, there's no current plan to lease it out. Additionally, Falls Township historically has looked at lease lots almost as subdivision. So if the owner, potential future owner, would like to lease out lot areas, they would have to come back to the township and essentially do almost a land development plan or subdivision plan, because in the past, that's how Falls Township has addressed lease lots.
All right, so is your plan for this lot to be a bigger version of what you currently have over at the Fairless Elks Lodge?
The Fairless Hills Lodge, the Elks Lodge on the other side?
Yes.
So
Where you have the
the
palletized mulch and the empty trailers and all that?
The plan is about 90% palletized, bagged mulch, and about 10% trailers.
Okay. So just a bigger scale version of that, roughly. I mean, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Okay.
So question with the palletized mulch being there, are you expecting more traffic? You're gonna have more mulch, I assume selling more product hopefully. You're gonna see more traffic from trucks, and how are we looking at handling that? Going into our neighbors over in Morrisville, how are we handling all that? Do you expect more traffic with more product?
I would not anticipate additional traffic in the area. I mean, the operation that Britton already has is essentially their operation. This will allow them to, I'll say, run their operation more efficiently. They're kind of on top of themselves in some ways.
So where does this mulch go that we're currently on the other side? Like, is it being sold to contractors? Is it being delivered to like Lowe's or Home Depot? Like, what are we
Correct.
doing with the mulch?
Most of it's going to garden centers. I don't think they sell palletized mulch to like individuals. Like, I can't go in with my
Right.
pickup truck and get it.
So I guess my concern would be, so we're not expecting to see any additional truck traffic. You're not seeing an increased amount of sales. You just have more space to store the existing stockpiles. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
All right, thank you.
Diane, do we have a review letter from the traffic engineer?
We do. I didn't send it to you. My apologies.
Give Mike up there.
The one thing I'll ask too is that if we end up putting arborvitaes along Route 1, to try and address the ones that were previously approved in the front portion closer to Trenton, because half of them are in some pretty bad shape and brown and falling down. Please.
Thanks, Bruce.
This isn't what the paper's printed on.
Again, it came in last week. And I asked the traffic engineer to send it to the engineer, so he must have sent it to McInnes and Dumac and Joe. I guess he didn't send it to you.
Any other questions before we have them go over the waivers they're requesting? All right, please proceed.
Sorry. Thank you. So, like I said, the first waiver is regarding lighting in the parking area. We're asking for a waiver to not have that lighting, as this is not going to be publicly accessible, not going to be open all hours of the day. There's not much reason for that. If the township would require some sort of security lighting, we'll obviously be happy to supply that, but there's, generally speaking, no reason for lighting, so we're asking for a waiver from that requirement. The second waiver request, it's actually the second and third kind of grouped together, 191-31A and 191-62. Those relate to waivers for not widening my lane and providing curbing along the frontages of my lane. Our next waiver, which will be our fourth waiver request, is 191-36D, which is to not require curbing along the driveway itself. Following that is 191-37B, it's our fifth request, to not require curbing along the parking facilities. Again, this is not a publicly accessible standard parking lot here. If we need any specific curbing for stormwater management, which I don't believe is the case, we would supply that, but that's our fifth waiver request. Sixth is 191-39G, which I referenced earlier, to not require sidewalks. If the township charges a fee in lieu, we will obviously pay that. Next request is to not require street trees. That's section 191-48. Again, if there's a fee in lieu, we will pay that fee in lieu. Following is 191-52.1B8A, which is to not restrict development from affecting more than 20% of the wetlands margin. Now, to explain this one a little bit, we are obviously not disturbing the wetlands. Part of our project and part of what I would say is the strength of this project is we are not touching the wetlands. The prior user had junked vehicles throughout the wetlands. We are not touching that. We are trying to protect as much of the wetlands margin as possible. Right now, we're between 20 and 25%. So that is a waiver to allow us to protect that portion instead of the additional. Following that, we have three more waiver requests, 191-78C2, which is what I would say is a standard waiver to not show certain plan details within 200 feet of the proposed development. Then there's 199-3D, which is a waiver, these last two relate to trees again, to not, or to allow removal of more than 50% of the woodlands. Essentially, right now, there's prohibition against, you can't remove more than 50. There are a lot of trees on this property, and for us to use it and clean it up in this particular way, we need to remove a few more than that. The next waiver request relates to the trees again, which is 199-4B6A, which is to not require planting of replacement trees. We know we'll have to pay a fee in lieu for certain amounts that we cannot replant. We are obviously amenable, like John mentioned earlier, to providing a thin line of buffering along Route 1 to the extent that we can without interfering with the existing wetlands or with the other billboards that are on site. But to the extent that we cannot obviously plant the number that are required, we would obviously pay a fee in lieu for those trees. I know that there was a comment in Doug's letter regarding us missing one particular tree in terms of our calculation of the waiver request. We agree, we understand that. We missed that one, so we will be submitting an amended calculation for that waiver in terms of the exact amount of trees. But overall, those are our waiver requests. Oh. No, one more I missed, apologies, which is 191-90C1, which is to permit the 1 inch equals 60 feet drawing scale. Again, another plan-related waiver together with the not showing improvements within 200 feet of the property, which would be quite a large plan. But other than that, those are the waivers that we're requesting here tonight. And if the commission has any questions, we're,
You mentioned a waiver from section 209.
-40, is that lighting?
That's a zoning requirement, so we can't give you that. You need to give variance.
Well, if that's the case, we'll obviously discuss that and see what we can do. You can't give us waivers from
From a zoning requirement?
What's the difference between a waiver and a variance? Potato, potato, right? Yeah, we'll look into
I
it.
don't know, maybe $50, I don't know what the fee is. I don't know.
If it were only $50,
Me personally, I'm not in favor of the waiver for disturbing the wetlands margin, and I'm not in favor of the waiver for not replacing the trees. I think what you show for landscaping needs to be a lot more along Route 1. There's very minimal trees shown on this landscaping plan. I wish I had time to look at this longer, but we just have it. Also question, you took away the release lines, but you left the parking spaces for the lease areas. So it makes me wonder what's really going to happen here. And if you are going to have parking spaces here, parking spaces shouldn't be backing out onto a road where it's going to be heavily traveled with trucks.
So a couple of things. With respect to the trees, obviously we received a variance for up to 100% impervious surface.
Yeah, that's crazy.
No comment on that, sir. But we received that relief. So to obviously plant trees when you have up to 100% impervious is rather difficult. But we're willing to do whatever we can in terms of that, in terms of providing that additional buffering. Now, with respect to the wetlands and the wetlands margin, so when you look at our frontage along Route 1, there's about 100 feet in terms of depth of wetlands, and then the margin is another 100 feet. That's about 1/3 of our property, not including other restricted areas that we can't improve based upon setbacks or buffers or right-of-way or what have you. So all in all, if we were forced to not disturb just the wetlands, but also the full margin, that's over 1/3 of the property essentially, over 5 acres of land.
My biggest problem is that this is just a complete blanket waiver. That's, normally you ask for a waiver or variance, it's for the minimum amount you need. There's not even a number here to tell us what the minimum amount you need is. It's just like we don't want to do any of it.
Well, I believe the waiver request for the margin is to protect the 20%.
Because, again, I didn't have these
And
plans.
I think John can address that
Because
a
the other
little
plan
more
said
detail.
0% wetlands and 0% margins. So,
The current waiver does have a specificity to it on the plan. It's 74.64. So basically 75% disturbance, or said otherwise, 25% protection.
so we're allowed to disturb, you're allowed to disturb 20%, you want to disturb 75%.
Correct.
What's the purpose of the millings that are on the other side of the stormwater management?
It's to gain area. Quite frankly, the property was developed under the belief that it was not wetlands. The Army Corps had issued a jurisdictional determination that it wasn't wetlands. So when the wetland issue came up, essentially we lost quite a bit of the site. So that was just us trying to claw back some usable space.
And the last issue I wanted to address was just the parking. Again, we're not proposing any leaseholds here, and as John mentioned before, and I appreciate that comment because I do remember coming before the township for a creation of leasehold space to park trucks on a separate property, separate client, a couple years ago, and that's true. So if we were to request or submit use and occupancy permit for separate leaseholds, then we would have to submit we'd have to submit a subdivision application for that leasehold creation, and we have to come back before you, whether that's 1, 2, or 10 leaseholds. So if there is a remnant of that on the plan, obviously that's unintentional.
It was I didn't catch the first two variants or waivers you asked for.
So the first one was apparently the waiver/variance request related to lighting, and again, we're working on that.
Lighting, okay, so you're going to make the carway 32 feet?
Could you actually just do me a favor and list I don't need explanations of them all, but list the actual waiver requests that you had again? I just want to be able to highlight them.
Yeah, sure. So
Outside of the 200s.
I was going to read them off my
All right.
because I get the
I'll-
percentage.
All right, I'll read them from John's plans. He did this a little better than I did. All right, so first one is 191-31A, which is regarding cartway width. 191-31A again, but that relates to the installation of curbing. 191-62 is again curbing along frontages. 191-36D, which is curbs to be installed along the driveway. 191-37B, which is the installation of curbing in parking facilities. 191-48A, which is street trees. 191-48-48B, which is again street trees. 191-52.18A, that's regarding the wetlands margin disturbance that we discussed a few moments ago. 191-78C2, which is the plan details within 200 feet of the development. 191-80C1, which is the drawing scale. Then 191-39G, which is sidewalks, to refrain from installation of sidewalks. We also have two requests related to trees. 199-3D, which is 100% removal of existing trees instead of the 50, along with 199-4B6A, which is a waiver from requiring the planting of additional trees to compensate for some of the trees we're removing. Right now, it looks to be 260 replacement trees. But again, if we'll plant what we can, but we're limited due to the layout of the site, due to the existing wetlands and the need to protect those, together with all the issues we laid out earlier today. So,
Thank you.
no problem.
And how wide is the proposed driveway, the paved one? 24 feet, okay.
24.
No other questions?
Any other questions? All right, I'll entertain a motion.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve preliminary and final land development recommendation for Britton Realty, agenda number 1, tax parcel 13-025-075-001, with granted exceptions and waivers from the Jones Engineering Associates letter dated August 22nd, 2024, of the following: 191-31A, 191-62, 191-36D, 191-37B, 191-39G, 191-48, 191-52.1B8A, 191-78C2, 199-3D, and 199-4B6A.
Move for second.
I'll second it.
Mr. Vinnie, please pull the board.
Mr. Everett?
No.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
No.
Mr. Binney's a no. Mr. Haney?
No. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, move on to item number 2, approval of the minutes for June 25th, 2024. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as printed?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
So moved.
All right,
Second. Aye.
good night, everyone.